Hi, good morning.
Hey Vicky, how's it going?
Well, okay, if I get my act together.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for being able to speak with me. I know it's busy for everybody, it's still being the start of the week.
That's okay, no problem. Always glad to talk about legislation.
Yeah. So Vicky, I wanted to ask, when it comes to these sorts of crimes,
Mhm.
like retail theft and victims getting involved due to human trafficking, can you tell me more about like why they're forced to do these sorts of crimes?
Okay, so I want to be clear that we are not aware of research that directly connects human trafficking and retail theft.
Mhm.
What I can talk about is how domestic violence victims are often um, coerced into committing a variety of different kinds of crimes because of the domestic violence that they're experiencing. So it could be drug use, it could be prostitution, it could be theft, it could be a variety of things. So we we need to be careful about saying this and this are directly connected because we don't always know that for sure. But there is definitely often a pattern of criminal behavior because victims are forced into something that they wouldn't necessarily do on their own if they weren't in a domestic violence relationship. So, and I will also say that sometimes people who are trafficked believe that they are in a personal relationship. Not always, but sometimes. So again, it's really tangled. It's really complicated, but it is true that folks. I mean, the prisons are full of women who have been forced into various kinds of crimes because they were domestic violence victims.
Now, Vicky, you said something that was interesting. You said sometimes they think that they're in relationships,
Right.
and with them getting this impression, is it kind of like they're feeling like they're doing this out of love for this person that may be abusing them?
That yes, that and because domestic violence is so complicated and the relationships can be so complex, people are often caught up in a relationship because it doesn't start that way, right? You think you're in love with someone and you do things to try to make the relationship be better, to try to stay in relationship with the person. If you're feeling like if I don't do this or that, then they're not going to love me and they'll leave me. I mean, we all experience that in different ways in relationships. So when there's domestic violence and emotional and financial uh, coercion as well, it often becomes it's all sort of mixed up together. And so being clear, many people are in relationships that are not healthy. They're coerced into different kinds of behavior, but they don't believe that they're victims of domestic violence because we interpret domestic violence as being physical. I'm not being punched. I don't have broken bones. I haven't been, I don't have stitches or anything. So therefore, I'm not a domestic violence victim. When in reality, most of domestic violence is coercion and manipulation and intimidation and psychological violence, not physical. It's just reinforced with physical violence.
So the House bill, um, I know there was like some, disagreements with that.
Mhm.
Can you tell me how it makes it harder on women that are victims of domestic violence?
So, so we're concerned that domestic violence victims will be swept up in the use of this method of when there's um, the kinds of things that happened in Chicago last summer, where there was a lot of looting and robbery and that kind of thing. Whether they've chosen to be there or not, we're concerned they'll be swept up. But the other thing we're really concerned with this piece of legislation that's now been signed into law is that in the Constitution, there's a Victims' Rights Amendment. And we worked several years, a number of advocacy groups worked several years with legislators to get that to a place where it could be put on the ballot to be voted into our Illinois Constitution. And one of the negotiations throughout that period of time was how long it would take a prosecutor to issue a summons to require people to come to court to support the rights of the victims of the crime. What we finally ended up with was a period of time without a date or hours or days attached to it. It was just to try to get it done as quickly as possible. With this bill, the prosecutors have to issue summons within 7 days. What we were always told when we were advocating for victims' rights, human beings' rights, that they couldn't do it in 7 days, that in a lot of places that would not be possible, depending on a variety of things in a locale and in each county. What they've said now is that it's possible. So we're wanting to either we wanted them to use the same language that it's in the current victims' rights bill, because essentially what this has done is given companies, corporations, more rights than human beings. So we're going to have to keep going back until we get some parity, so that we at least treat human beings who are victims of crime the same way we do corporations and companies.
Right. And we'll come back to that. But I wanted to also speak about that point you made about being swept up. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Well, so my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is this piece of legislation would allow essentially a new crime, that that during these periods of time when there's a lot of social activism and some people use it as an opportunity to rob stores or commit vandalism or whatever, that they're able to charge them under this retail theft bill, this new retail theft bill. So if, for example, a person who has been trafficked or is a victim of domestic violence has been forced into doing some of these behaviors, they could then be charged with this crime, which is an automatic felony, instead of looking at the individual circumstances and understanding that perhaps they were coerced into it and there should be lesser charges.
So you saying like there's not even like some consideration for leniency, just we're throwing the book.
Correct. That's what we're concerned about.
Got it. Because I know there was another House bill that was called, I want to say it was 4848, where it would allow victims to present evidence. It didn't quite get discussed at the Senate like you all had planned, but could you speak to more of how that would have helped better than this retail bill in terms of like protecting victims?
Right. Well, it would have given a person an opportunity to say, wait a minute, I was forced into this, or I wasn't part of that group. I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, whatever their defense is. It would give them an opportunity to present a defense that's more individualized, rather than this felony charge that they would be facing.
Because what type of evidence could they kind of use in court to show that like I am being abused and forced into doing these things, and these are not things that I would do on my own?
this is a perfect example of why prosecuting domestic violence has been so difficult over time. The court system is set up with an individual charge. So using House Bill 1091 as an example, this is the charge: criminal retail theft, whatever it's called. That's the one incident where I'm going to charge you with felony and go forward with my case. In the case of domestic violence, especially since so much of it isn't physical, you have to show a pattern of behavior that has coerced or intimidated someone into doing something. In these instances, if they're charged with a crime, that they would not have done if they had under their own will. And it's difficult to do that the way our justice system is designed, because our justice system is designed to look at one incident. And domestic violence isn't one incident. It's a pattern of behavior that leads down a road of somebody being experiencing domestic violence in all its forms. So a person would need to say, over time, I have been forced to rob a liquor store, mug somebody on the street, break into these stores during this activism. And if I didn't, I would be beaten. If I didn't, I would be raped. If I didn't, my family would be harmed, because that's what happened when I didn't do things in the past. So showing that as a defense takes some work.
Why is it hard for victims to leave? Because they're not quite, shackled up and can't leave, because they can go to the store and, be forced into doing these crimes. So why is it hard for people to kind of get out of that pattern?
For exactly what you're talking about. If you're being threatened and intimidated, it's no different. It really isn't any different than people who perhaps are in the military, and they're if we think about what basic training is like, you really break a person down to remold them. That's what basic training in the military is like, right? We've all heard and seen stories about how the drill sergeant is in your face and screaming and calling you names and making you scrub the toilet with a toothbrush and those kinds of things. That's not different than what happens to domestic violence victims. And if it's mixed up with the complexities of being in love with someone and being in relationship, but let me suggest to you, David, that the real question is, why doesn't the person stop using this behavior? Why doesn't the person stop being violent with their partner? That's the real question we need to ask. And that's where our focus needs to be. How do we stop this kind of behavior in our society? And it's not just one individual at a time. It's the social structures that keep that allow this kind of behavior to go on. And that takes a lot. That takes all of our systems working together to understand, for example, when you see two little toddlers in daycare and one picks up a truck and hits the other one with it, and we think, oh, isn't that cute? They're playing together. No, that is not cute. That's when we begin to see that people are using violence to get what they want, right? So we have to understand that we do that in all sorts of ways. Right now, we're seeing a version of domestic violence play out against the world stage. Vladimir Putin believes he has the right to go in and kill women and children and people and destroy homes and hospitals and schools to get what he wants. So that's like the big version of it. We cannot allow that at any level in our society. And we have to stop making excuses for that kind of behavior. We can help change that kind of behavior. We want to help people who are causing harm, but we have to stop making excuses for it.
And Vicki, I also want to ask, now that this new law in place, it's been signed, what could change about it to help this work better in victims' favors? Because, obviously they're trying to protect companies, people are getting ransacked, but right. What could change? What sort of amendment? I'm still learning the terminology for laws and things like that. But what could be, revised to help support domestic violence victims?
Well, I think one thing is to get parity. So if you're a victim of a crime, it's not just domestic violence. If you're a victim of a crime, under the Constitutional Victims' Rights Act, they should also have no more than 7 days to get this court procedure moving, just like the companies now have in this new law. And the other thing is what you spoke to. Let's make sure that people have a right to defend themselves if the circumstances are such that they weren't just part of some group that was intent on destroying some business. We need that as well. We need to have that in place. So, whether or not it gets done in veto session or we have to wait till next year, this current law is moving forward. So now we have to catch up and make sure that individual victims of crimes have the same rights as businesses and corporations.
And that kind of sparked something in me because you mentioned how it's not directly tied to, retail theft is not directly tied to human trafficking, but it could be just as simple as maybe a man and a woman, or, just two partners, right? And, just to prove that this isn't like they're not actually a part of a crime ring as this law intends to punish.
Right.
This is just a two partner, just maybe just two people, together, and one is being forced into this sort of crime by another.
Right.
And from that, because right now I might be spitting things back to you that you just mentioned earlier, but I just want to make sure I got it clear.
Yeah.
And from that, they want to be able, when they if they were to go to court for this, it's kind of hard to defend against this new law now that they might be up against, because they don't really have the power to show that this was a domestic violence case.
Right. It will be much more difficult. So, think about in the big picture, right, David? We are in a time where we're really trying to understand the use of law in criminalizing people's behavior that really isn't criminalized. So small time, the sweep in the 80s with the drug wars and the small time marijuana users and that kind of thing. Now we're having to go back and undo all of that. And people spent decades of their life as felons, making it difficult to get housing and jobs and school and take care of their families. And now this is yet another example of what the potential of causing harm again by automatically going to where, let's charge them with the worst crime we can get, instead of really trying. There were things in place. There are RICO laws that you could use to, if you're really going after this sort of organized crime. But yet here we rush to make new laws instead of really taking a look at what we've already got on the books and how to utilize those to our best advantage when we do have something that's organized and large, like what they're referencing.
Now, is there any laws that you could think of? Because I know it was kind of mentioned in that press release, like there were already laws in place that would, charge people and punish them for a crime of this sort. Is there any laws you could think of that just so I could go back and say, like, there were already laws in place, like, House Bill 1091. Now there was, this law that came from House Bill so-and-so. Is there anyone you can think of?
So I am not a lawyer. I need to be real clear about that. But I believe that the organized crime laws that are on the books were designed specifically for this kind of behavior. So if someone or someones are organizing a group of people to go commit a crime or crimes, then looking at those RICO laws, as we call them, would probably be a place that they could utilize. It's already on the books.
Okay, so you said there was already something on the books for this type of organized crime?
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe so.
And I just want to ask you one more thing. I know we kind of covered it already, but that whole 7-day thing, that kind of confused me. You were saying It should
Mhm.
either it shouldn't be limited or it should be more than 7 days. What was it about 7 days in court?
Well, when in the current Victims' Rights Act with the for human beings, there is no time frame. It's just as soon as they can get to it, right? It,
No
try to
time.
be expedient, but there's no time frame. With this new law for retail theft, prosecutors have to act within 7 days. So, you know, if they want to give 7 days to victims of crime, that's great. I think will be more difficult because this is in the Constitution and it's difficult to amend the Constitution. If we can do that another way, that's great. We tried to say, just use the same language that's currently in law rather than add this new, where they decided to go forward with the new. So now what do we do to make them equal, to have equity between human victims of crime and corporate victims of crime?
Mhm, mhm. So in other words, there's more of a expedited process with this new
Exactly,
retail law, you know,
exactly.
because they already kind of getting swept in. So now that they're here, they're being looked at as retail thieves versus domestic violence victims.
Yeah,
And with this retail theft, the law is getting expedited with this 7 day timeline versus with the Victims' Right Act. Um, there is no timeline.
correct. There's no stated timeline in the law.
Okay, so it's not like it's like a sense of urgency when it comes to like getting them charged.
Yes, yes.
Because with it not being a sense of urgency, does that leave room for somebody to say, hey, well, hold on, I'm a domestic violence victim. This is not what I intended to do.
Well, I think it's more, it's for the court system, not for the victim. It is, you know, we will do it as quickly as we can, but we have all these other circumstances that keep us from responding within 7 days. So I think we need to get parity with that. So